So expect a lot more nutsoid violence in this region, because the Iranians, everyone forgets, the Iranians are not the violent actors here. That's the Saudis. ISIS came from Saudi Arabia. Al-Qaeda came from Saudi Arabia. And we should expect to see a lot more groups like that boiling up throughout this entire region, just burning down everything that the Iranians think that they have achieved in the last 10 years. It's going to be wretchedly awful. The Saudis have tried something like this 3 or 4 times in the last 15 years, but the market has never been right. Now, the market's right. The emotion and the leadership are also kind of lined up. The Saudis originally went to the Russians with a deal for a preemptive cut to manage the oil market back in January and February, and the Russians said no. So the Saudis got pissed off. This wouldn't have worked without global oil demand being down by 20, 30 million barrels a day. Second, leadership. We got a new guy in charge, Mohammed bin Salman. If you've seen my readings or writings, you know that he's not my favorite person. He kind of makes Putin look like a kinder, gentler kind of gentleman. But he's young, and he's taken the institutions of Saudi Arabia by storm. He's consolidating power, and honestly, this is what a king does. And if this works for him, he will have consolidated his person as the most powerful person in the region for at least the next couple of decades. I think he's aware of that. This is his proving ground. And so far, in my opinion, it's going really well for him. Yeah, most countries have nothing they can do. There's not a damn thing that the Nigerians can do, for example. Venezuela is out of the picture already. Brazil's probably going to have some shut-ins. They're going to damage him for years. Shale's offline for a year or two. There's really not a lot of things. Russia's different. Russia has always been a master of linkage, whether it's something that is earned or deserved or not. And Russia's ability to dabble in a lot of different theaters give it some things that it couldn't do, that other countries couldn't do. So, low-hanging fruit. Kazakhstan, Azerbaijan, both of them oil exporting former Soviet republics. A lot of that oil either transits Russia directly or transits territory that the Russians could shut down if they wanted to. You know, there's 1 million barrels per day easily that could go offline just by flipping a couple of switches. The Russians also can use, how should we say this, non-conventional means of limiting competitors' output. We saw back in, I think it was October, just how vulnerable some of the Saudi oil facilities could be. It's entirely possible that the Russians could stoke some unrest in this or that country in order to take some oil infrastructure offline. And considering the current price environment, there would not be a huge rush to restart that. That brings risks. So, for example, if the Saudis got caught doing that in Saudi Arabia, you can guarantee that the sort of tender mercies that the Saudis have unleashed upon their own region with groups like ISIS and Al-Qaeda will then be visited upon the Muslim regions in Russia itself. Remember that the Saudis were one of the big sponsors of the Chechen wars back in the 1990s, and it doesn't take much of a reach for them to extend further into Russia to places like Tatarstan or Bashkortostan, which are big oil transshipment points within Russia. So Saudi can play that game as well. And when the Saudis play that game, it has a lot longer lasting effects. I mean, look at Afghanistan today. You know, that's largely because of policies the Saudis had in place back in the 80s. Can you imagine if that crept far enough north to get into the Muslim belt in Russia itself? So yes, the Russians do have tools, and yes, the Russians do look for the long game, but that does not mean they're immune to the tools that they would be using. The most natural, most stable storage supply in the world is the American Strategic Petroleum Reserve. How that works is we drill down into a salt formation, we inject water, and then we put a second pipe down that basically pulls it out. And so you inject the water, dissolve some salt, some ultra brine comes back up, and then when you're done hollowing out your cavern, you put in crude. And because of the natural temperature gradient in this bulb-shaped dissolved storage facility, it circulates itself. So it's cheap, There's no chance of oxygen getting in. There's no chance of a leak. There's no chance of an explosion. If you want to do above ground storage, you constantly have to churn that stuff, or it starts to separate, or you get associated gases that bubble out and you get an explosion danger. It's not that it can't be done. It's not that it's technologically complicated, but it's expensive and it's time consuming. So we might see storage this year expand by 3, 4, 5%. That would be a huge build out for 1 year. But honestly, anything more than that, not in the cards. The demographics are weird. I mean, overall, they're very similar to Mexico. They're on the young side, but there's a huge split between the north and the south of the country. The north of the country is practically pre-industrial when it comes to demographic structure. Lots and lots of children and young people. The southern half is almost like Germany. It's aging into mass retirement incredibly quickly. Most of the excellent educational opportunities are in the south, and most of the call centers are in the south. It's not that the north is a lost cause, it's just that this really is not one country. It's more kind of like the Holy Roman Empire, where there are little pockets that do different things. Now, in the world that I see coming, India is likely to do pretty well. They never really joined the American-led order. They never became an export-led economy. They're the first place outside of the Persian Gulf, so they're never going to have a true energy crisis. The problem is that northern section that is just horrendously overpopulated and horrendously underdeveloped has been horrendously overpopulated and horrendously overdeveloped for 1,500 years now. There's no way that it's going to turn the corner in the next 10. If it hasn't in the last 1,500. So India is stable, but I don't think it's about to become a superpower in any stretch of the imagination. In addition, that northern section, wow, you want to talk about COVID? That just absolutely terrifies me. One of the reasons why the Spanish flu hit India so much harder than it hit Europe or the United States back in the 1918 epidemic is because of that density of population. It's far more densely populated now, and this new virus is far more communicable than the Spanish flu was. So India, by the numbers, seems to be doing okay, but that's because India doesn't test. So we're just going to see the death rate skyrocket, which is going to unwind a lot of the gains. Also, kind of the core industry that India uses to fuel its tech center is call centers. So, you work in a call center for a while, you build up your expertise, and then you move into software. Well, they're losing that completely. The reason why everyone moved their call centers to the Philippines and India is you could build a pocket that had a good power connection, a good internet connection, good phone connections. You build a server farm, you put in a lot of hardwired desktops that have the capacity that you need, and then you have 3 and 4 shifts of people that cycle through the same hardware. Well, you can't do that with COVID, so they all had to go home. And not everybody has a power at home. Not everybody has internet at home. So we're seeing companies in the United States who had outsourced all of their call centers and tech support to India and the Philippines having to bring that back, because in the United States, that sort of technical support can work from home. And for every day that this continues, India is seeing the bedrock staff development of the call centers erode away, which means the next step up is going to be that much harder moving forward. Doesn't mean the end of Indian tech, but it does mean the end of cost-effective Indian tech, and that has always been their big selling point. So they'll still have some stuff at the top end. The top 1% in India, that's still 15 million people. That's not insignificant. But this big institutional boost that they had that gave them scads of programmers at a low cost, that's probably over.